Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is out after 12 years as new Israeli government survives a confidence vote. To discuss this in more detail is our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari, joining me once again from Los Angeles. Lisa, what do we know about Netanyahu's successors, Naftali Bennett and Foreign Minister Yair Lapid, on forming the new coalition after the alliance of their parties ousted Netanyahu?
Well, for some, the good news is it's not Bibi, and for others, the bad news is that it's not Bibi. That's what I can say about this government. There's so many parallels that can be drawn here between the Trump era in the United States and the Bibi era for Israel. Bibi is a very, very tough leader, and that's wonderful with Israel having so many adversaries. He wasn't as flexible as Bennett and Lapid will be. He's not as inclusive in some cases. But at the same time, you have so many enemies, so many hostile states surrounding Israel that someone like Bibi Netanyahu was able to keep the country for 12 years with minimal security breaches. I know we just got over a war with Israel. We had another one in Israel in 2014. So it seems like, wow, it's been one after the other. But you also have to look at Israel's history of giving away land like they did with the Gaza Strip and getting more violence in return. So you have to understand Bibi's mindset or outlook was, well, let's build settlements because that land is ours, right? And why are we giving our enemies a foothold or, a landing strip in order to, start firing back at us and have a closer range? So he had a very different outlook. This Bennett and Lapid coalition, how did it even happen? They wanted to go forward. They wanted to move past this gridlock that was happening with Bibi Netanyahu, and they looked to the future and said, we want to be more inclusive. They're including Arab members of parliaments, of the Knesset in their coalition. It's definitely going to be more inclusive, so much for those people who claim that Israel is an apartheid state, right? It's always had Arab and Muslim members of parliament, but now they are going to have a louder voice. They're going to have a bigger platform. There's, again, people cheering on the streets of Israel, and there's people who are protesting this. They're very upset about Bibi being out, and really we're very much proud of the work and the strength that Bibi has shown as leader of Israel for 12 years.
Many world leaders, including our own Prime Minister here in Canada, Justin Trudeau, and your President Joe Biden, congratulated the new Israeli government, for obvious reasons. But what will this really mean, Lisa, for relations with the Palestinians?
Yeah, great question, Hal, because, one of the things that people were looking to see is how quickly these calls would be made to the new government. Why? Because there was such a delay here in the United States, for example. It was deafening, right? The fact that Joe Biden came into office and it took him, I think, more than 3 weeks to call Bibi Netanyahu. So the immediate call to this new government perhaps is showing some sort of daylight between Bibi and this new government to say that, it was a personal issue that his predecessor, President Obama, and now Joe Biden had with Bibi, and that they would work together more closely with this new government. And what will it mean for the Palestinians? Well, we have yet to see. Look, in a lot of instances, new governments come in roaring, right? Just like Joe Biden and Kamala Harris did. They came in roaring about the southern border. And what happened? At the end of the day, they go down and they see the facts, they see the logistics on the ground and say, do not come. The same thing that President Trump was saying. The same thing here. Well, perhaps we have a softer face of the Israeli government, softer than Bibi Netanyahu's. But when push comes to shove, will they let Hamas rain these rockets down into civilian areas in Israel? No, not at all. It's going to take a lot. We have seen all sorts of leadership in Israel, from the extremely liberal to the extremely hawkish like Bibi Netanyahu. We saw Yitzhak Rabin shake Yasser Arafat's hand on the White House lawn on Bill Clinton's watch, and we saw nothing come of it. There was no peace. It was just a handshake, a photo op, nothing more than that. What will come of a more lenient government? Well, we'll have to see if the Palestinians are ready to make a shift, if they're ready to oust Hamas, if they're ready to really look at peace as a viable option for their future.
Hamas, meanwhile, announced that its new prime minister assumed office in the Gaza. Lisa, what do we know about this individual?
Yeah, more of the same. Look, this is similar to the election that we're having in Iran. Who's going to become prime minister? The leader of Hamas, someone who's from Hamas. Hamas is a terror organization. They are trying, lipstick on a pig. You cannot make this into a legitimate leading body, a government that will, make a change for the people of that region. We've said many times, yes, free Palestine is a correct hashtag, but it should be free Palestine from Hamas and no one else. That is the the leadership that is suffocating its people. Their people are not allowed to speak out, where women are not allowed to freely go out onto the streets, where the textbooks for young people talk about killing Jews instead of teaching them arithmetic. So, it's going to take a big change to see, significant progress in Gaza.
U.S. President Joe Biden and his Turkish counterpart Erdogan have known each other for a number of years now, Lisa, but their recent meeting was their first as heads of state. It comes at a tense moment for relations between the two countries.
Yes, well, we've called Turkey a frenemy for many, many years now because they have gone more and more rogue as the years have gone on. Even under President Obama and then Trump and now Biden, we have seen, Turkey kind of skirt away from the Western Hemisphere and go towards the Eastern Hemisphere, meaning they align themselves more with rogue states rather than the Western ones that require them to have, some sort of ally friendship and to decorum and to be a NATO state. And if we're allowing them into these bodies, then they should behave in a way that's suitable for the West and our interests in that area. You look at what Turkey's involvement was in Syria, for example, in killing the Kurds. That was something that was not in alignment with the U.S. interests. Or looking at a lot of the involvement that they have with Qatar, another terror funding state, or the Iranian regime, or their dealings with Russia in Syria, again on the ground. So there's a lot of proverbial slaps on the wrist that need to be delivered from the White House to Turkey, but it seems like that is not the way that Erdogan is going these days.
Diplomats outside of the European Union have cautioned that negotiations with Iran to salvage a landmark nuclear deal, Lisa, still needs more time. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, what's so interesting, Hal? It's like this juxtaposition between, these Western allies speeding forward at the negotiating table with Iran's regime, and on the other hand, all of this evidence coming out warning these statesmen from signing a deal with the Iranian regime that would probably be meaningless. Why? Because they are continuing with the enrichment of uranium. They have stopped with the surveillance of their sites. They have not been cooperating and, more than that, they've put more money into terror and they've gone forward with their weapons program and they have been hush hush about all of this. Does not look like they're looking to be cooperative. It doesn't look like they're looking to be signatory to another deal. So there are warnings, but there's also this eagerness to get back into a nuclear deal with Iran. And we know the news just broke a few hours ago that the White House had secretly taken some of the sanctions off of the Iranian regime, those sanctions that pertain to Syria, without telling Congress. Now, is this going to become a habit of not telling Congress, going forward and not really consulting? We know there's a lot of voices in Congress, in Senate, coming from both sides, warning against getting back into an Iran nuclear deal, but who's listening?
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was just at the G7 summit, Lisa, saying that we should really be aware of the issues involving both Russia and China. And of course, your President Biden, meanwhile, urged the G7 leaders to call out and compete with China, competing with China as to maybe bring more manufacturing back to North America?
That would be wonderful, right? More manufacturing, more jobs. I mean, we gave it to them on a silver platter, and now it's time to collect. This was Donald Trump's entire platform, even before he became president. That it's just not fair what the Chinese are doing to us. And obviously, we got involved in a tariffs war with China. Nothing was solved, and now here we are again in a worse position because China is mightier. They have a more beefed up military. They have more security surveillance. They have reached their tentacles in the region, and they have a more ironclad rule back at home. So we're not in a better position to tell China what's up, but at the same time, there's more awareness now. So you have, Canada and the United States and the allies telling China and Russia, for that matter, that they better behave themselves. But when they're that big and that strong, I mean, it's going to be very difficult to curb China's behavior.
Now, the group of 7 leaders ended their summit by demanding that Russia take action and investigate the use of chemical weapons within its territory and hold accountable those behind the recent ransomware attacks, along with other cyber crimes, Lisa.
Yeah, so these were the two transgressions that they wanted to talk to the Russians about. That was the use of chemical weapons, as you said. And of course, what affected us here in North America is these massive, massive cyber attacks on the oil pipeline here in the United States and the meat factory that I know was affected you guys in Canada, I think locally as well.
Yeah, JBS
So,
Foods, you're right. Absolutely.
JBS Foods,
Yeah.
correct. That shut them down. It's a reminder as to the strength that these cyber heavy nations have. It's China, Iran, Russia that have put their money and resources into their cyber militaries that are on the offense, not on the defense, the way we are here in North America. But it's a reminder these are soft targets, meaning we have to firm them up. We have to look at all of our infrastructures that are online. That's everything, right? Our banking, Wall Street, hospitals, our government, all of these infrastructures that are online need to be firmed up because these are soft targets. Now, to ask Russia or to ask China, please do not launch these attacks. It's a start. It's a symbolic start. But you know what? It's up to us to firm up these targets and to not be vulnerable and to become victims to these types of attacks in the future.
U.S. President Biden is meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Geneva this week, and it marks the latest chapter in a very adversarial relationship, to say the least. Now, Lisa, Biden has been quite blunt about Putin in the past, saying he has no soul, and even called Putin a killer in a news interview earlier this year. How can these two actually work together?
Yeah, way to warm up the ties before you sit down with somebody, right? So, yes, they're definitely involved in a war of words, exchanging these types of I guess,
Barbs,
bad words.
shots, yeah.
Yeah, shots back and forth with one another. It comes down to the U.S. and Russia having to have some sort of semblance of a relationship. But, the current White House is very wishy-washy, and it's a very dangerous way to be in terms of foreign policy. If you're going to have this attitude of appeasement, then you need to go forward, kind of with the carrot and stick, right? You have to be softer and speak a certain way and sit down and have diplomacy. But if you're going to make ultimatums, you don't then sit down for appeasement. And I feel like that's what we're doing in many of these cases. If you look at Afghanistan, or if you look at Syria, if you look at the Iran nuclear deal, if you look at Turkey, if you look at Russia, China, and the list goes on, that's the way that they've been handling these crises around the world. That's not the way you sit down with a rogue dictator or rogue ruler like Putin, like Erdogan, like the Iranian regime. They're not going to respond to this kind of cat and mouse. You're not going to use these kinds of words and then want to sit down. We're out of a treaty with them. That was one thing that the left criticized Donald Trump for exiting the treaty with Russia. Now we are out of a treaty again with them. It's tense, right? But you have to have a backbone if you're going to stand up to our adversaries, and that's especially with regards to foreign policy. What is necessary to have a place in world order, to have a place on the world stage, to have a seat at the table in terms of these big foreign policy issues, and of course, Russia, China, North Korea, the Iranian regime, all being priorities right now. You can add Venezuela to the list because it's right at our footstep, and the Iranian regime has its claws there as well. So we want to keep our eyes on these hotspots. And every time President Biden sits down with one of these individuals, it's an opportunity, but it's also a risk.
Russia's defense ministry is reported to have over 2,000 missile troops gathered in eastern Siberia to practice maneuvers with road mobile intercontinental ballistic missiles. Should we be concerned?
Absolutely. If you take a look at these missiles, I mean, these are like mama missiles. It's like they have multiple warheads that can deliver, I think it's 200 kilotons each. If you multiply that out, it's not fun. But again, forget about the details. You have to look at the agenda here. All of our adversaries are beefing up their military presence. They're beefing up their military capability. What is this telling us? It's telling us that they sense weakness. When they sense weakness, that's when they believe that they could start flexing their muscles. Not only are they beefing up their capabilities. They're making announcements about them. North Korea did the same thing a couple of weeks ago. We're seeing the Iranian regime do the same thing in the seas surrounding the Middle East. We're seeing the same thing coming now from Russia. So, sensing weakness coming out of the White House is not a good thing for our foreign policy. It's not a good thing for the free world, and it's something that we should all take seriously here in North America.
Our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, joining us once again from Los Angeles. Thank you, Lisa.
My pleasure.